So, you take a story from the 1900s about something that happened in the 1800s concerning someone who lived in the 1700s, and you get tonight's episode of Rolling with T-Bone. Let's dive into it.
Welcome to Rolling with T-Bone Presents Cryptids, UFOs, and Paranormal Stories. I hope that you enjoy.
Alright guys, out on what is an absolutely gorgeous day, riding Miss Jazz of course. Glad to be back to the chest mount. That means the weather's warmed up enough to where we don't have to put on extra clothing. But anyway, that's not what we're here about. Here it is guys, we have made it to our paranormal ghost story. I guess this is, I don't know if this is actually the first one, but it's the first one that's going to be totally dedicated to paranormal activity. And like I said, it is a story from the early 1900s about something that happened in the 1800s concerning someone who lived in the 1700s. Now, if you are new to my channel and you haven't been around for a while long, you'll find in my back catalog where I have made certain videos about pirates and stuff like that, talking about the golden age of piracy, of course that being the 1700s. But tonight's tale is a little bit different than your run-of-the-mill tale about Blackbeard or Flint's Gold, Treasure Island. Tonight's story a little bit different. So guys, tonight's story is about a pirate who lived in the 1700s, who lived during the golden age of piracy. Now some of these names are not going to be the exact names, so I'll go ahead and tell you that now. But we're going to be talking about the pirate captain known as Johnathan Strange. Now, Johnathan Strange's story is really a strange story. By the historical count, the best I can tell, Johnathan Strange actually was not a full-blown pirate. But of course back then you had in the 1700s, 1701, 1702, which was the time of, you know, Blackbeard and Charles Vane and, you know, Black Bellamy, Black Bart, William Morgan. During this time, Johnathan Strange could really go either way, and you had certain pirate captains that were that way, meaning they could do pirate activities, or if the fee was right from a government, they would take on a shipping job, because a lot of the pirates in those days didn't use the big glamorous Hollywood ships of the day. They used a smaller class of ship known as schooners. And schooners were trimline, more narrow, built with a lower profile, meaning their deck railing was lower. And they were built to move through the water. They were built to get the knots up, the nautical miles per hour. So, as the story goes, in 1701, Johnathan Strange and his crew set out with a pretty good sum of golden Spanish doubloons. Probably by today's currency would be worth about somewhere between $50 and $60 million. Meaning that ship was loaded to the gills. And of course the ship I'm talking about is none other than Johnathan Strange's ship, known as the Sea Phantom. So the Sea Phantom was known as a ship that was fast. Of course, a lot of people believe that the Disney series Pirates of the Caribbean, the ship that was called the Black Pearl, was loosely based on the Sea Phantom. Black on black, black sails, black deck, black hull. Now, Johnathan Strange was the type of captain who would get on the edge of a gale, which is a hurricane or just a bad storm out on the water. To you, us land lovers, they called them gales. And he would get his ship right on the edge of a gale, and if he could tell what direction it was moving, if it was going in the direction he needed to go, well, all that wind coming off them hurricanes, riding on the edge of those gales would, push him forward at very high nautical miles. So the way the story goes is that sometime in 1701 or 1702, the Sea Phantom basically just disappeared. Now, no one really knows exactly what the fate of the Sea Phantom was. There was a lot of people thinking that perhaps Strange had got on the edge of a gale and his luck ran out. Some people say that he came across the British Navy and he opened fire on the British Navy ship and he ended up getting sunk. Either way, they assumed that the Sea Phantom and its crew ended up in Davy Jones' locker at the bottom of the ocean. But they just didn't know for sure. So, in the 1800s, around 1856, 1857, there was a cargo ship that was en route from the Caribbean islands to England, and this ship had a kind of a hodgepodge crew on it. But the story kind of focuses on the captain, who was a royal captain for the Royal Navy, his navigator, and one of the he wasn't the first mate, he was the second or third mate, an Irishman. They called him Irish Bill. Now, as a lot of y'all know, during the golden age of piracy, Nassau, Port Royal, which was an island in the Caribbean, was a pirate stronghold. Now, a lot of the stories of the pirates of those days come from that area, from Nassau, from Port Royal. So this story didn't, though. This story came down just being passed from seaman to seaman to seaman. So apparently what had happened was that Irish Bill was doing his rounds on the ship at night, checking the cabins, making sure all the men were bedded down like they were supposed to be, while the captain and the navigator was on deck going over their charts. When Irish Bill came to the captain's room, however, he found the door to be unlocked and ajar. Probably a 3 or 4 inch crack, and he could see that there was a light coming out of the captain's quarters. So Irish Bill called out, no one's supposed to be in the captain's quarters. He knows it's not the captain because he had just left the captain and the navigator on the deck. So he goes a little closer to the door, and he can hear what sounds like a scratching noise. Kind of like chalk hitting a chalkboard. Not a screeching noise, but just like somebody was writing on a chalkboard. And he opened the door, and that's where Irish Bill got his first real scare at. Because as he would later report to the captain and the navigator, that he saw a skeleton sitting there wearing a pirate's outfit, complete with a hat, and that this skeleton was writing on the chalkboard with a piece of chalk. Now, I don't know if it's like this modern day. We would have to talk to Salty Badger or some of those guys who are out on the water in more modern times, but back in those days, sailors were very, very superstitious. They didn't like women being on the ship. They thought it would bring bad luck. They didn't even like women's dresses to be on the ship because they were afraid it would bring bad luck. They were very, very superstitious. So, upon seeing this skeleton sitting at the captain's desk, Irish Bill didn't hang around to find out exactly what he was writing down. Back to the deck he went, where he found the captain and the navigator. And Irish Bill began to tell them about seeing the skeleton in the captain's quarters. And the captain didn't really know what to make of it because he knew that Irish Bill was not a drinking man. Yeah, there was a guy on a ship that was not a rum drinker. But he knew, him and the navigator both, they knew for truth that Irish Bill was not prone to telling fancy stories. He was not a drinker. So, after Irish Bill spun the tale to him, the three men would return to the captain's quarters, where again the door was standing ajar, with the captain making the remark that he knew for a fact that he had locked his quarters before he went on deck to look at the charts. So, with a little bit of skepticism still, they opened the door. Of course, by this time, there is no skeleton. So, as they're checking the room, the captain goes over to his desk, and he finds the chalkboard laying there. Now, on the chalkboard, he sees written coordinates, longitude and latitude. And after a quick, of course, well, this was what Irish Bill told him the skeleton was doing, was sitting at his desk writing on his chalkboard. So, a quick check of the charts, they realized they were less than 75 to 100 clicks away, miles, from this coordinates. So after a little debate and a little time thinking it over, the captain finally decided that it would be in their best interest to actually go find this coordinates and see what's there, if anything was there. Now, of course, Irish Bill was against this. He had taken the sighting of the skeleton earlier as a bad omen. But, of course, the captain, being a stern man, decided to put Bill in his place by telling him to go to his quarters, turn in, and leave being the captain of the ship to him. Alright, so we're just going to discreetly go back out the way we came in. So, the captain would make a couple of notes in his log about this journey to these coordinates. Of course, most of your captains, especially if they were Royal Navy captains would keep a pretty extensive log about, you know, where they were, what their coordinates were, things that were going on. He had noted that for the last 4 or 5 days that there hadn't been just a ton of wind. Now, you know, when you don't have engines backing your ship, you're at the mercy of the wind. You're at the mercy of Mother Nature. If she's not putting forth wind to fill your sails, you're not moving forward. So he said the wind had been up and down, but he made a special note to say that the wind on this particular voyage was pushing them forward at a pretty good speed. They were making enough knots actually to where he didn't even have to drop the main sail on his ship. So they were moving on pretty good. So as the story goes, you probably know where this is headed. They arrived at the coordinates, what would be to us about probably somewhere between 10:30 and midnight. It was a clear night except for a fog bank, and now I'm not going to go by stern and bow or, you know, whatever. I'm just going to say off to the left side of the ship there was a fog bank, and the guy in the crow's nest, this was back when they still put men in the crow's nest, started screaming, "Captain, ship, ship." So they asked if he could see it through the moonlight enough to make it out. And he could. He hollered back down. He said, "Captain, I believe her to be the Sea Phantom." Now, up until this point, only 3 men knew exactly why they were going to these coordinates. But when that man in the crow's nest shouted down that he identified that ship as the Sea Phantom, a lot of men aboard the captain's ship started, that Navy ship started getting nervous. And I'll tell you why, because they're certain historians who have went back through old logs of captains all throughout the end of the 1700s and the 1800s. And most people who saw the Sea Phantom either just reported what they thought was a black ship, or they had come across a black ship, but none of them ever engaged the Sea Phantom, meaning none of them ever got close enough to see what was happening or if it was actually the Sea Phantom. So the word Sea Phantom brought everybody onto the deck of the ship. And now this was kind of going to present a problem for the captain, because he's in the midst of about 35 to 40 sailors who are paranoid, let's say, who are superstitious, who see bad omens in almost everything. And now, as their captain, he has taken them within 75 to 100 yards of the Sea Phantom, a ship that has been missing since 1702. You're talking 1856, 1857. By this point, that ship's already been missing way over 100 years. So the captain knew he was in a pretty bad spot when it came to his men. So he probably made really the only decision that made any sense for him to make. And that was, he told his men, we're going to drop anchor here and we're just going to set until first light, and then once it gets daylight we might venture in closer. So somewhere around 2 or 3 a.m. a lot of the guys had already drifted back off the bed, all except for the navigator and Irish Bill. The navigator told Irish Bill, he said, I want to see what's going on with that ship, because he knew, being identified as the Sea Phantom, the navigator knew that there was Spanish doubloons on that ship, and he knew it was a lot of money. So they lowered a boat and they rowed over to the Sea Phantom, and they began to climb up her side. And once both of the men were on deck, they noticed that the boards of the deck were very, very soft from all the weather, the gales, the wind, the rain, the hail, the salt water. So of course they know that they've got to watch their step. So they take their lanterns out in front of them, and they begin to slowly make their way down into the heart of the Sea Phantom. Now, they would reach where would have been on a schooner the main holding area for cargo. Imagine being probably the second deck, and there would have probably been at least one good heavy door to protect everything. So the captain, or the navigator, slowly opens up the door, and him and Irish Bill are met by a awesome sight. So not only did they find the Spanish doubloons, they also found the skeleton that Irish Bill had swore up and down was writing on the captain's chalkboard earlier. So Irish Bill found redemption in finding this room, because he said, see, I told you, this is what I saw. So they look around the room, they find a set of scales, and the scales have some of the Spanish doubloons in them, meaning that Johnathan Strange, who they confirmed it was Johnathan Strange, had probably been weighing the gold as he was sitting there waiting for eternity to catch up with him so he could cross over. But upon picking up a couple of them, the skeleton moved, and it caused Irish Bill to drop his lantern. Now you're in 150-year-old wood. You're in the heart of a ship that is surrounded by 150, 160-year-old wood that hasn't been kept up properly. So the lantern catches everything on fire. So the two men are trying to fight desperately to get back up out of the ship and get back to the boat. And as they got on the deck, the fire had already woke up some of the other crew from their ship, the captain included, and they were standing on the deck screaming at the navigator and Irish Bill to get back in the boat, get off that ship before they burn up on it. And as the two men climbed down, they turned and looked back across the deck, and they swore they saw the skeleton of Johnathan Strange walking up out of the hull of the ship. So as they got back to their ship, climbed back aboard, they looked across, and now by this time the entire top of the ship is on fire, the cracking, the popping. And it's said by every man who the captain verified in his log that they all heard two words. And the two words that they heard were, "Thank you." Meaning that they had released the soul of Johnathan Strange, who was bound to that ship. So there it is, guys. The first ghost story to show up on Rolling with T-Ball. Now, of course, I had to make it a good pirate story, a good boat story, because, well, that's why I love pirates. I've done a lot of studying, as y'all know, in the golden age of piracy. Now, about the story itself that I just told you, showed up on radio in the early 1900s. The story was called The Sea Phantom. And of course, it was a made-for-radio story. But even back then, the men who adapted this story for radio maintained that it was a story that came from a real captain's log, that this really did happen. And over the years, up till now, people still see ghost ships out on the water. So if they didn't release the soul of Johnathan Strange, maybe these guys are still seeing the Sea Phantom. But there it is, guys, man. I hope y'all enjoyed this. I kind of got to thinking about this story today, and I love the story of the Sea Phantom and Johnathan Strange, and it always entertained me because I always just believed it was a good story. But y'all let me know in the comments. Do y'all like the ghost stories? Did you enjoy this one? I'm going to try to get some cool imagery to go with it. I hope that happens. But y'all let me know. Did you like the ghost story? Would you like for me to do this again? And remember, I will try to base these ghost stories. If I keep doing these, I will try to tell them based on true stories. And I'll tell you what, guys, I'm going to get off here and I'm going to continue on with my ride and enjoy the rest of my afternoon. So we got GAM coming up, which y'all will see this after GAM. So I hope we had a good time. I hope everybody got to make it. But guys, until the next time, y'all take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and hey, thanks for watching.